Hi, this is Tina Powell, host of In the Suite, where I sit down with top women leaders and some of the biggest names in the financial services and the wealth management industry. Together, we'll discover some of their best secrets and top strategies to grow great business, build a strong brand, and lead teams in the 21st century. I hope you'll enjoy hearing their amazing personal stories of triumph, trepidation, and transformation in hopes of becoming better leaders ourselves. The time for you to lead is now, and you're in the suite. With over 25 years of industry experience, Julie Littlechild is one of the most well-known, widely respected women in financial services and the wealth management industry. You don't get a seat at Michael Kitces' Financial Advisor Success Podcast as guest number 3 unless you are an expert and a qualified one at that. And for Julie, she's a leading pioneer and powerhouse in the fields of client research, feedback, and the client experience. Julie is founder and CEO of Absolute Engagement and author of the book by the same name. Absolute Engagement works with individual advisors, teams, and enterprises to incorporate the voice of the client in their businesses in order to drive deeper engagement and growth. Her clients are in the US, Canada, the UK, and Europe. Julie is a recognized expert on the drivers of client engagement and a popular speaker on how the client experience is being disrupted and how to leverage those trends to drive referrals. She's worked and studied successful financial advisors and their clients for a period of more than 25 years. And prior to founding Absolute Engagement, Julie launched and ran one of the industry's leading research firms focused on client engagement. She sat on the National Board of Financial Planning Association and was twice identified as one of the 25 most influential people in financial planning by Investment Advisor magazine and won the Influencer Award in Practice Management from Financial Planning magazine. She holds an MBA from the University of Toronto. Julie's also co-host of Becoming Referable podcast with Steve Wershing, which you can find on your favorite podcasting platform. I highly recommend you listen to their most recent episode on how client feedback has changed and to learn the strategies you need to know to better connect. And one of the many gifts you'll discover about Julie is her wit and gift for communication. She's highly engaging and someone who can make you laugh and wow you with facts, data, technology, and a meticulous process for everything else you can think of. Every woman in the suite should get connected to Julie and especially to her work and understand how to make sense of today's new normal. I hope you'll enjoy this episode of Julie Littlechild in the Suite. So yes, Julie Littlechild, it's quite an honor to have you in the suite today, and I have been looking forward to this for months. Thank you for joining us for what promises to be such a fun and information-packed episode. I'm really, really excited to learn more about the work that you're doing, your origin story, and I know that we're going to walk away with a lot of key insights here. So I feel like it's going to be really a great information-packed episode. So now the world knows you, okay, but for the very few people listening today in this podcast who don't know Julie Littlechild, here's the thing that makes Julie very, very special. So she is you're a researcher, a recognized speaker, a CEO. She's an author of The Pursuit of Absolute Engagement. She is a co-host of Becoming Referable podcast. Side note, my favorite episode is on brand importance with Tina Powell back on October 31st, 2019. But seriously, Julie Littlechild is one of the most highly respected women in the financial services industry. She has had over 25 years of industry experience. And not only that, you do not get to be Michael Kitces' third guest on the Financial Advisor Success Podcast unless you are exceptional. So, whoa, let's start here. Welcome, Julie Littlechild.
Oh, thank you. I love talking to you anyway, so I feel like we just turned the mic on and then we can just have one of our usual conversations, which is great. So I'm so pleased you're doing this podcast as well. Congratulations. It's great.
It was daunting And after being a guest on a few of the other podcasts, and yours included, I said to myself that I really wanted to use the platform as a way to tell the origin stories of leading women in the industry, and even the stories that we don't get to hear. It's, if you kind of think about it, as a behind the scenes. So I found, I haven't been in the industry for as long as you have, like really just half that time. And one of my questions to women is like, wait, how did you get here? Like, who told you? I always thought that if you were going to be in financial services, that number one, you had to be a math major, like my daughter. Number two, that you had to come from wealth, right? You had to have a life of privilege in order to really understand money. And even three, that you had to be some sort of financial advisor or some sort of financial capacity, have that proficiency. And so what I found was, wait, not everybody, the origin stories of the people who I most highly respect in the industry were actually quite different. And so there is no right or wrong way to get here. You just get here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, you have to have if you're not an advisor in our world, I think you just have to have such an appreciation for the work that advisors do, right? And the impact this industry has. And that, you're right, that there's so many different roles. And who would have known years ago where that we'd both end up here, right? I think if I trace my story back, I don't know if you do, there wasn't a list that says I'm going to get into financial services and start my own business. That's for sure.
Why don't we kind of go back? You've been in this industry for a long time, and I'm fascinated to speak to women like you who knew that. How did you see the writing on the wall to be here? It's an incredible industry. You get to work with such great people, and through your podcast, through my podcast, I feel like we're changing the narrative and changing the version of what people think financial services is and what it means. But how did you get here? I think I'm really excited. I've never asked you as many times as we've talked, Julie. I've never asked you that question. How did you get here?
Well, I always feel like I want some answer like I had a dream as a child and then it all came true and it wasn't that wonderful. But of course, that's not that way at all. I mean, I think sometimes you sort of stumble into an opportunity and that opens up doors maybe that you didn't see. So for me, I was going down a path of kind of marketing and PR out of university. And I made the decision at some point because I was concerned about opportunities. And I thought there was a lot of real, frankly, gender bias in that, particularly in PR, some limiting factors there. So I went back and did an MBA, and then that kind of allowed me to decide which path to go. And I ended up connecting with a guy who was doing some work with mutual fund companies and financial advisors, very small company. Got to know him, began to work with him, and then literally over a period of a few years, researched top producing advisors, developed content. And then when I outgrew that role, I began to see where some of the opportunities for me were, but I stuck with the industry. I loved the industry. I loved working with advisors. I just needed to go in a different path. So I always think it's like emergent strategy. It just, you kind of evolve over time, right?
Yeah, I think that the path reveals itself when it's
Yeah.
when it's time. And one of the things that I love and that I discovered working through this industry is that financial advisors are real compassionate people. It's really it's really a relationship business. And that's what leads, is that people really caring about other people and wanting to make a difference. And anytime there's money involved, people think the opposite, but not in the financial planning profession. And there's a lot of different nuances in the industry as well. Well, where I think if you've never been in the industry before, we collectively group the term, but there's so many different areas and different levels of expertise, and even there are delineations and divisions within the industry within the industry.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so much, and I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't exactly plan to be an entrepreneur either, right? I mean, I just kind of I thought being in a small company was better for me. because I thought maybe I would get fired if I was working in a large company. I'm not sure I was the best rule follower, and I needed to have a seat at the table, but I thought I was going to be very happy as sort of 2IC in a small company. But having said that, I've realized since I started a business, there's almost like this delineation of people who couldn't do anything else but run their own business, and those who think it looks really cool but just aren't built for it. Like there's just something different. And because I've talked to so many people over the years who say, I think I'm going out on my own. And when you press them just a little bit, it's like they're not, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to fit. And so I don't know what else I would have done, frankly, if I hadn't started a business.
I love it. Did you have the model for entrepreneurship in your own family? I mean, I did. My parents
Yeah.
were my parents were both entrepreneurs, and I remember being early on when I was in college on an interview, and the question is like, well, what do you want to do 5 or 10 years? What's your dream
Yeah.
job? And I said proudly, well, I want to be the owner of my own business, but geez, I mean, it's the harder of the two
I
to
know.
do.
Yeah, really funny. I had no examples of it. So my father was a tool and die maker at General Motors, and my mom was a secretary at a university. And yeah, I couldn't even find an entrepreneur in my family if I tried. So I think maybe it'll come after me. Maybe my son will take this path, but who knows?
Yeah. He's how 10 now?
He's 10. Yeah, he
Okay,
asked me a
so
while ago. He said,
the double digits birthday.
"Oh, I know, big day." He said, "Should I be taking over the family business or following my passion?" He asked me. I said, "I think the right answer is follow your passion."
Oh, I just love that he's already thinking of that. So yeah,
He's
there is
thinking,
some sort of entrepreneurial DNA in your son for sure. And whether or not it sounds like you knew that entrepreneurship was the right path for you, because you have to be willing to do a lot of different things as it relates to having your own business, and you have to dive into areas of your business that you're not necessarily comfortable. At least I'll speak for
yeah,
me.
yeah,
Right. You are the everything. You are the administrator, you're the bookkeeper, you're the tax accountant, you are head of sales, you are head of marketing, you're head of R&D, product development. And when I look at absolute engagement, I want to talk a little bit about your business and what
yeah,
you do, but wow, man, you have an impressive back end to your business that you don't even see on the front end. So with all respect, wow, I'm just
yeah.
amazed. So, part of you sounds like you had some of the aptitude to actually build it. But talk to us a little bit about absolute engagement and who you are and what your organization
Yeah.
actually does in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, our focus is entirely on helping advisors and advisory firms, enterprises to use the voice of the client in their business, to integrate the voice of the client, and then use that input to define a differentiated client experience and find growth opportunities. So, at our heart, we're about the voice of the client. I think that's our core expertise, but we're very much driven by what do you do with the information. And that's where, so we have quite a robust client feedback, voice of the client component, and we have an equally robust sort of training and support offer to help people use the information that we gather for them.
Yeah, because you lean into heavily into research.
Yeah.
It's what you're known for. But let's face it, just data and research is really nothing unless that you act upon that. And I didn't recognize that you until digging a little deeper into your organization that you had the mechanisms to actually help business owners. Research is hard in that you could be delivered a collective body of intelligence and data, but it's knowing what to do because there's a lot of different steps, right? Would you agree there's a lot of different configurations? If you look at the results of a survey,
Mhm.
you might actually think that road A is the one to take, but somebody like yourself, Julie, that you've had over 25 years of experience, and you understand what resonates for the client experience. You know how to direct the client, which I think is extremely powerful.
Yeah, and it's the critical piece, right? So we've built some really robust systems to help advisors gather feedback, and then at the same time we have sort of large scale digital learning platforms at an enterprise level, and then one-on-one coaching when we're working with individuals. Data doesn't have a lot of import if it's not looked at in context and if it's not acted on.
So when you started your business being an entrepreneur, did you start with both components in mind, or did the business evolve because financial advisors were needing that critical piece?
It really did evolve. When I started the business, I had sort of researched and developed a lot of content around building and growing a financial advisory business. And I thought that's what I was going to do. I was going to coach. And I discovered pretty quickly that I'm a terrible coach. Nobody should hire me as a coach. I have great coaches that work on my team. And but and that was more of a personal discovery. But what I also figured out is every time I was talking to advisors, we started with what do clients think, and how we can't talk about improving a business if we don't know what's important to your clients. So every time we began to reach out and gather client input, and then if you looked at that over a full decade almost, we evolved that into really clear processes to gather feedback and make that the core of what we do.
So do you notice a certain type of mindset or DNA on behalf of your clients? Because we talked about it from the entrepreneur's perspective, that not everybody's cut to be an entrepreneur, but I have to imagine not everybody is willing to get client feedback.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, I mean, regularly, if I'm speaking, I'll sort of ask audiences, what's the number one thing that gets in the way of asking for feedback, and fear is sort of the number one thing that comes up. Very self-aware, if nothing else.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so I've yet to meet someone who says getting input from your clients is unimportant. I think we've all accepted that that's important, but there's either a fear or there is a perfectionism. We've sort of noticed these three personalities. I just don't want to know. That's fear. Perfectionism is, let me just work on the business for a year. And then when everything is really running smoothly, then I'm going to go out and get feedback. And then there's another group that we don't talk so much about, which is really just, I don't need the feedback because I know what they need. And so we don't spend a lot of time with that group trying to convince them otherwise.
They don't listen to this podcast. Don't worry, they're not in the today. They're not in the suite. So have you ever had to coach, or your coaches being, we of course, we know you're not coaching.
Coach,
exactly.
Already established that.
But have you ever had a case where there is actually where your coaches have had to coach leaders on the fact that they need to be a little bit more receptive and more willing to solicit feedback from their clients, because it leads to growth and it leads to great engagement and sticky clients?
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of them don't ask, how do I gather feedback? They're interested in why. And that's where I think a lot of our research comes into play as well, because we can point to some evidence that says, that engaged clients want to be asked what's on their mind. We can point to trends like co-creation of value that show us that the future of experience is about more of a partnership with clients. But we do have to get past the idea that we know what our clients want and need, and that we just need to focus on delivering that instead of just asking what's most important. And I would say that if we haven't learned that lesson in the first half of 2020, we probably never will, because never has there been a time when pausing and talking to clients about how they're really feeling has been more important than, it's been critical.
Yeah. And I have to say what I noticed is a lot of people some offices were backpedaling into that because they didn't necessarily have even the communications infrastructure to handle to even address their clients head on. Like, yes. And when I say that, of course, I mean that kind of tug in cheek that, yes, there's always the calling mechanism. But then what happens is that a lot of us went on to Zoom because the client experience is about sharing information. And so if it's a regular phone call, then you can't see your account, you can't see your documents, you can't see your statements. And those are the very things that clients ask about, especially in a pandemic world. So, what happened to your business? What happened, did you notice in the advisory profession when the world had halted completely because of COVID?
There've been these two phases, and I think we've all, well, maybe three, experienced it in different ways. One was, panic.
Yeah.
But full transparency, I have never experienced a faster and more complete grinding to the halt of a business as we did in the first part of this year. And that was due in large part because there were other things that became more important. And I had to look pretty deep as well and say, would I honestly recommend that someone go out and gather feedback? It's April 1st. Should you be
Right.
sending a survey to your client? And it's not an easy thing to come out and say, no, you should hold
Mm.
tight on this, even though this is the basis of all of our revenue in the business. I believed it to be true. Now, the fact is that things then began to evolve. We looked at what's changing, what this meant long term in terms of client feedback, how it needed to be different. We began to develop tools and strategies and questions and built off some research that we did in March as well. And then over time, it just became part of the conversation again. People opened up as we all did, and we were ready to say, you should gather feedback, but things have changed and it's a little different and we've learned a thing or two. So let's do it differently.
So, how have great advisors been, handling the opportunity to do business different than normal, knowing that having the value of your lens and saying no, don't ask them for client feedback, but yet be in touch with their clients. So, are you like literally coaching clients to tell them what to say and how to say it? Because one of the fog has lifted, obviously. I mean, it's June 12th, but it's not too far a time. Like 3 or 4 weeks ago was not that far away, and nobody wants to be wrong. Advisors especially, everyone wants to be right. We are in a business of making people feel to do the right thing and to accomplish goals that are very quantitative driven.
So I would say that in the shorter term, as we went into April, what we were recommending is that it's still important to reach out. It's still important to connect and to support your clients. Rather than sending a full survey, why not reach out to understand how they're feeling and where they need help? And then to use that to communicate and support more effectively. So and then as we continued from there, increasingly we got back to broader based feedback to the point where now we're doing our normal business. But what has still changed is I think of it as it's almost like we flipped the switch a little from instead of focusing entirely on, how am I doing? How am I doing as an advisor and delivering service? We're focused on how are you doing as the client? We developed an entire self-confidence index based on the research that we did across the country so that it gave advisors a different view into the level of concern or vulnerability of clients to allow them to have more engaging conversations. I don't know if you find this, but I find our language is changing. The more we're connecting with one another, It's a little less formal, it's a little more authentic, there's a bit of a tone change in what we're asking. So even the way we position feedback and invite feedback, we've looked at the words. Questions have changed. We want to understand, how do you feel about the future of experience? I mean, do you want to keep on with Zoom? Do you want to go back to face? Are there different topics that are really of interest to you right now? And so all of that has informed our business and probably will, continue to inform our business. Things are just a little different.
Yeah, I think that this whole pandemic is basically a crash course on our business evolving overnight
Yeah.
to meet the needs of the client. You just said something very interesting about the confidence score,
Hmm.
and I want to pick up on that. Is that something that client, that confidence index, is that me as the advisor in confidence in myself, in being able to, I guess, say the right things, do the right things, or is it the clients, is the gauge, the client confidence saying, hey, I'm not feeling too great right now. And so rather than you having a discussion about my portfolio or my planning or how I rate your service, you need to deal with me first and some of my issues as an individual.
Yeah, it's largely the latter. So we came across it in a way through the industry research. I think, when we think about confidence, often we're asking about confidence in the markets or,
Mm,
confidence in your plan. When we broke it down, there were a few questions that were really starting to inform the results. And it was things like the extent to which clients felt financially secure, the extent to which they felt in control of
mm,
their own reaching their goals, confident in their ability to reach their goals, and did they have a clear plan. And so as we looked at that, we thought, this isn't confidence in anything external, it's more about confidence in your own ability and your sense of control. So that's why we kept calling it self-confidence.
mm.
And I thought the good news about that was that advisors can do something about that, right? There's not much they can do about the markets, but they can help clients to feel more confident about their future. And we created this index on those four questions, and it was really striking that when you cut clients into sort of a low self-confidence, moderate, and high, the impact was so dramatic on the business in terms of things like satisfaction levels and net promoter score. So it told us that just by increasing self confidence a little bit, closing the gap between, say, moderate and highly self confident, it was an extraordinary impact, not just for clients, but for the business as a whole. And so I thought, okay, it's like a new form of risk, I think, low self confidence,
Yeah.
because it's connected to loyalty and net promoter and satisfaction and all of those metrics that we look at.
Did you notice like trends in the aggregate? Like I think that that would be really fascinating to see that during certain weeks, you can always almost see like you had just mentioned something that was pretty awestrucking. And that is that a little bit of improvement in a client's confidence level had delivered a major improvement to the practice and the relationship. So how are advisors closing that gap? How do you close that gap? What do you say to clients and what do you do so that you help to make it a better client experience and the clients know that you fundamentally care. I mean, advisors fundamentally care about their clients anyway, but sometimes with pandemics like this, I myself felt paralyzed at one time, like
Yeah.
what to say and what to do and what's the right way to reach out and now we had a pandemic, we had a health crisis that led to an economic crisis that is now a racial divide, that a society in crisis right now.
Yeah.
So how do you close the gap when all of those things are going on around you?
I know it's incredible, right? I often think about how we're going to look back at this time in history. and we'll realize how strong we all are to get through it. But in how to deal with it, I think that you can look broadly at the data, sort of the trends, and you can also look at it one on one. So, for example, if an advisor gathers feedback and they discover that an individual client has a low index score, the client may never have mentioned that. Like, they don't identify in that manner. But what it does mean is the advisor needs to hit pause, to not focus on the reassurance and where we're going with the plan, but just to take the time to dig in, to give a client the ability to examine that feeling for themselves, to label it, and to deal with whatever's going on in their life so that they can actually hear the advice that they need to give. So I think it changes the kinds of conversations that advisors have. At a broader level, we were able to identify sort of 6 different categories, 14 different statements that were correlated with high confidence. And
Mm.
so, some of it related to things you might expect, like a focus on planning, understanding life goals, that kind of thing. It was also connected to the quality of the review process. And so it wasn't just my advisor meets me often enough. It was I feel energized and inspired when I meet with my advisor. It was a connection to non-financial as well as financial issues. So we've got this list of statements, but you can sort of see these as levers that you can pull
Mm.
to try to close the gap to some extent.
Well, I think that that leads right into some of the research that I saw that you published. That was the research that you did with the Investments and Wealth Institute, whereas you surveyed 1,200 investors from a period of March 10th to March 24th. Again, a key time during this
Yeah.
pandemic, and that the answers to what you would learn, that it's very much a conversation. Empowering the client means that you're not only talking about conversations about their money, but that you're talking about other things. And so when I saw these results, I said, wow, these should almost be subject matters that are built into, like, a financial planning tool, for example, that even though it is financial planning, but talking about second careers might not be in your financial planning software, but maybe it should. I mean, can you talk to us and tell us a little bit about some of the insights that were gleaned as a result of that research? I found it personally fascinating.
Yeah, so one of the things that we looked at was which topics are you interested in learning more about? Now, again, we were in field from March 10th to 24th, but of course, research works well in advance of the day you field. So we
Mhm.
had absolutely no idea what was about to happen when we
Mm.
hit go on this study. I probably would have added some different questions in if I'd been given half a chance to go back in time.
But
But
you had great timing. I
right?
mean, talk
Well,
about timing the market. Absolute
I know. How to
engagement.
Well, we know, obviously. Look, I've been doing this study since 2008 in some way, shape, or form. Although, interestingly, the first time we did it was 2008 and then 2010. So we bookended another interesting time in history that informed a lot of our thinking about what engagement really is. But we could see differences when so if someone responded on March 10th or 11th versus the 16th to the 24th, we had sort of
Wow.
3 segments. There were certain areas that we could see shifting. Loyalty was one of them, like it was
Mhm.
getting worse as we got deeper. When it came to the topics they were interested in, some of the top things chosen were fairly common around maintaining sufficient assets and that sort of thing. But the biggest shift between the 10th and the 26th was health and wellness. Right.
Mhm.
And in fact, we just released another report through the Investments and Wealth Institute where we segmented on the basis of wealth, and health and wellness, as well as I think charitable giving for the high net worth clients, was even more extreme. So yeah, health and wellness, thinking about second careers, caring for aging parents, helping the kids make better financial decisions, legacy, volunteerism, all of these represented shifts just in that 2-week period. So you can see how quickly our mindset starts to change, right? When we, during a period like this. And we got to
I
know these things about our clients, right? So that's like to your point. I mean, these are the questions we need to ask as part of client feedback so that we can support clients differently.
And how often should we be asking for that feedback?
Well, generally we do all sorts of different types of feedback, qualitative, quantitative, polls, issue specific. But for broad based feedback, we normally do it every 18 to 24 months. I would argue, and I have not experimented with this yet, that for those that have been gathering feedback over the last little while, particularly on these things like what are they interested in learning more about or where are they challenged, might want to do some quick almost pulse updates in the period
Mm.
ahead just to stay on top of how things are changing.
And do I need to have a formal mechanism? Again, if there's a way to ease into feedback and ladder into feedback, is there just one or two simple questions that you can give us that we can just maybe even put in an email form? Or I don't know if there's some baseline resources that you have at Absolute Engagement that can just help us get out of the weeds. I've never really thought about the benefits of client feedback, and I'm not just saying that, I really truly mean that. I'm thinking like, wow, does Absolute Engagement work with digital agencies? Because it really is important. I'm guilty of the fact that I don't ask my clients. I might, like, obviously want to check in. Hey, how are you doing? How's everybody? So yes, but my personal experience with feedback is that when you send somebody a survey, or that you do it when you take yourself out of the equation,
Yeah.
then that's all of a sudden where there's critical learning opportunities, and they'll write something or say something that they wouldn't have said if you had asked them in a discussion or
Yeah.
email. You can really uncover a lot of gems.
Well, you
That
can. You're right. So, like, I mean, there's the element of being a third party, which kind of elicits some honesty, and it's not negative. Always is. Sometimes it's just opportunities. The other thing is it's just not robust. I mean, if you ask one or two clients, you're not getting a statistically significant sample across all of your clients. So, if you're trying to make decisions on changes, I think it becomes really, really important to do that formally. But, so I think informal feedback is kind of that first step. It's not robust and significant and quantitative, but just having one or two questions along the lines of, is there anything else we can do to support you? Or, how are you feeling about the relationship so far? That kind of thing is a start in the right direction. And then it becomes more about just trying to get down to one or two questions. These days, I would say the questions have to do with how confident clients are feeling and what they're interested in, because that can inform a communication strategy. So if you wanted to isolate just a couple of things that are important, I would say that. And the only caveat I think is to fight the urge to use feedback as a way to ask clients what you should do, as in questions like, what else could I provide to deliver great service, right? Which is comes up all the time. Clients don't know. It's not their job to know. You'll be highly disappointed with the results. I think our job with feedback is to understand what clients are thinking and feeling, where they're challenged, what their aspirations are, and then use that to inform the experience, not to ask them what the experience should be.
Wow. Wow. That's really deep. I think one of the things that I've also taken from the whole client experience, you have an incredible module on that, by the way, is not only that you should try to create a systematic client experience, but you can actually build a client experience that perhaps that is inspired by your own experience outside of the vertical. That
Yeah.
not all experiences, I think that's what I'm really finding, that's what I'm really inspired by, is saying, wait, it doesn't have to be, there's no playbook to follow, but your playbook, whatever it is, should be evolving, that you set the bar higher. I love what you just said, that it's really not up to the client to tell you what to do. As far as your client experience, don't ask them. I guess try new things. The best way is to offer new services? I mean, what do you find is one of the most common action steps that if I've gone through some form of formal client feedback surveying of my clients,
Mhm.
is there a common thread that it all comes back to that, oh yeah, we're not doing 80% of this and we should be?
The first part of that is hard to do because we always tailor surveys based on the objectives. So the objectives change from one advisor to the next. If they come in and say, I want to have the best possible client communications plan, then we're going to tailor our questions around what clients value, how they want to receive information, the kinds of topics that they care about, all of those things. And that's going to be the big finding. I would say overall, clients are satisfied. I'm always saying, look, if you're just trying to assess satisfaction, save yourself the money. You don't have to do a formal feedback for that. But particularly now, really going deep on, whether it's the kind of content that will resonate, digital, social, some of these aspects of the experience that I think advisors need to be asking about so that they are evolving their client experience. It's not just how are we doing, but it's where are we going, and we need to ask more questions around that. At a very granular level, though, I would say that often the biggest return, because we look at it in terms of return as well, is things like uncovering either cross-selling opportunities or referral opportunities among
Mm,
clients just by asking certain questions. That tends to be the eye opener.
I know, and actually you have a podcast that's named after that, Becoming Referable, with
Mhm.
Steve Wershing
Yeah,
of the client-driven practice.
yeah.
How did you come together? I mean, the concept of just being more referable is also too something that we want. It lends itself well to the client experience, and everyone wants to do better and be better. But how did you both come together? Because you're in Toronto
Yeah,
and he's in Rochester,
yeah,
and this is a podcast that you've had now for years, so
yeah.
this isn't anything new. I think that maybe this kind of collaboration are the very types of things that we should model after
Yeah,
to get more women into financial services, to get more women who are
absolutely.
podcasting as well too.
I think there's so much room for more podcasting, and I in particular, I love some of what you're doing because we're kind of targeting how people are feeling and what they're experiencing, and as you said, kind of at the outset, having different conversations. I mean, Steve and I have known each other for a lot of years. I'd consider him a friend, and that's for me the most important thing because I only like to work with people I like. But we also had a very complementary focus, right? He focused on referrals. He does advisory boards. So our body of work connected, but we knew what swim lane we were in. So
Mm.
it's non-competitive in that sense. So I think it was his idea. I think he just said, "Why don't we do this?" And then 3 years later or something, we looked around and something, and we'd been doing it every other week.
Oh, I love it. It's great. You've got a lot of great guests and a lot of great
Mhm.
information. Where do people find the podcast? It has its own landing page and website.
Yeah, it does at becomingreferable.com for the
Okay.
podcast.
A really super easy URL
Exactly.
to remember. I do think like this was an important time to have you on because there's an opportunity with every type of crisis to either show up the
Yeah.
right way and to make a meaningful difference and to reevaluate yourself and how
Yeah.
you're doing. And yes, I'm even doing a better job, I think, making sure that more voices are heard and bringing a little bit more diversity and inclusion to our stories here and to broadening that in a way that I think is very much necessary for today.
It is. And, just this time, right? Where and here's where I have to imagine that men and women have had some different experiences, some similar, but I mean, I'm having more deeper conversations with women about what this has been like. this
Yeah.
year, trying to run a business and run a family and not feel guilty all the time and feeling scared and watching business go out the door, and just the fact that people are opening up, and it's not one giant things are fine, things are wonderful. They haven't been fine or wonderful, they've been dreadful. And
Yeah.
just we just got to have these conversations.
I like giving it an authenticity to it
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And just saying that everything is not okay, even just by saying like everything's not okay and I'm not okay, or I'm
Yeah.
not, as they
Yeah.
releases that. I think one of the quotes that I love that inspired me reading: before we can ask, how can we lead clients? We need to ask ourselves if we are ready to lead. That's the question right there. I feel like that's the opportunity right now. If you're listening to this podcast, is I want to, I'm doing it for myself too. We're having these discussions because there is a different way to show up and to lead right now. That's different, fundamentally different than it was a month ago or even 2 months ago. And so hopefully what you do as a result of listening today to Julie and to myself is that you add some sort of action step, because it goes back to the premise of your whole body of work here. You have insights, you have data, you understand how people are feeling. But if you actually leave it on the table, then it's done absolutely nothing but just sit there on the table like a potted plant.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, these are the tough questions, right? And I think I said that because I just experienced it, and I knew it took some time to show it. Leadership is hard, right? And if you're feeling it all weakened, it's okay. I mean, vulnerable leadership goes a long way, but boy, it's keeping that strength up. Same, whether it's as a parent or as a business owner, a manager of a team, it's tough. And I guess we've all given ourselves a little break to deal with that, and I think it's been powerful and a way to connect in a very different way. And I hope this kind of vulnerability extends to these conversations about race, and all of the conversations we're having now as well.
Oh, I think it's very much needed. And unfortunately, it's come back to the same thing that, wow, it took a crisis to get here. But it
Exactly.
did take a crisis to get here. And that's the silver lining of where we are
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
And part of the goal or the why of this podcast is to get more women into financial services, particularly
Yeah.
women who are over 40. Because
Yeah.
I've had a hard time finding women who are over 40 in positions in the financial services, other than, yes, the client, the front facing financial advisor
Yeah.
world. But because we are both in that cohort, being over 40 and being in an industry that we love,
Yeah.
where do you think are the best opportunities for women? Because you've had the ability to work with lots of different organizations, not only financial advisors, but you've been able to partner with media, you've been able to partner with leading institutions. So, from your vantage point, where do you think that there are opportunities for women over 40 that are not necessarily like known to people, that could be beneficial or even another step in the career ladder?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. My big shifts came at 50. I think that's when some of the most significant decisions and changes kind of smacked me over the head. The easy response might be, if you looked at people who support this industry, you, me, I can name a lot of senior women who run businesses who support the industry. So clearly, that's an opportunity. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly, there is a lot of that, but that's not the traditional route. So increasingly, I'm seeing women take on more senior positions, and I'm also seeing women just walk away where they can see like not trying to make this their personal goal to fight the fight within a small company that's never going to change, and just saying there are big firms, and I find it almost hard to believe we have trouble finding opportunities, because I'm seeing more and more of it at a head office level. I mean, the percentage of advisors that are female is still appallingly low. When I think about the broker dealers and the custodians and the wirehouses, and I know the first two much better, I'm seeing a lot of women in senior roles. So maybe just finding those opportunities is the best way to go. I don't know. I've always struggled with this. How do you attract women? How do you focus on them? It's a tough. I don't know. Maybe you've cracked the code. Can you tell me?
So here's one of the things that I've learned as a result of this podcast, and that is that successful women like yourself have always encountered a challenge, or you've hit a roadblock, or something that maybe questioned someone's personal decision to remain in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you stick with it goes back to resilience. It goes back to Angela Duckworth's grit and resilience. It is just saying that if you, and Simon Sinek's why, if
Mm-hmm.
you understand why you are here, if you are driven by that why, then you will stick with something as hard as it gets. As many people who want to throw rocks and boulders in your way, as many brick walls that you are going to face on, it won't matter because you're driven by a higher purpose.
Yeah.
And that's what I found is the connective tissue with every single woman on this podcast.
Yeah.
That she's encountered some sort of challenge, but she's looked that challenge right in the eye and she's tackled it with the help of other people, not by herself, but with people that have believed in her, with mentors, with sponsors, with advocates, with other female leaders. And that's what I want this discussion to be. That somebody's listening right now. And I want, if that's you right now, I want you to stick with it. I want you to be resilient, and I want you to call us and ask whoever is in that inner circle of health, health, right? Health is a big part of the equation as well. Ask for help when you need it, because there's plenty of people. We just don't ask for it. I'm guilty of not asking for it enough.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's so many women who are here to raise everybody up, including women. You're right. I think that whole idea of knowing your why, there are times where I've talked to women, and maybe it's age, where they feel like they're running into brick walls and they feel dissatisfied. But that's because sometimes they're just on a path that they thought they were supposed to be on. And like I said, for me, it was when I turned 50 and I just had to have a very hard discussion with myself to say, well, what do I want this to look like going forward? And from then on, you just go. But if there's a lack of alignment, I guess, between what's really what you want to do and what you're doing, some of that friction will just come from inside yourself, never mind the rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I can attest, one of the most glorious things about being over 50 is that you really, really understand yourself and why you're doing certain things. And you are aligned in a way that is totally different from any other decade. You question everything. And unless it is completely, I love your word, aligned to who you are, what you do, what you stand for, what you believe, you won't do it.
Yeah.
But if you know that, again, there are enough people, there's enough want, there are plenty of opportunities, COVID or not. I understand that unemployment rate is high and all of those things. But I am telling you that this is a people-to-people business and a people-to-people discussion. And the more people that you reach out to, the more networking events that you attend, even whether or not it's Zoom. Forget about Zoom fatigue. Get on a Zoom. I've had some unbelievable conversations in the last few weeks that are related to race relations and appreciation and expansion of just our understanding of each other. There's no such thing right now as Zoom fatigue.
No.
really get out and meet people.
Yeah, I've never fully understood that. I get being in meetings is tiring, but I've gotten more out of this than I can say over the last couple months.
There's one question that I love to ask, and I have
Mm.
found again that connective tissue. I'm not much of a researcher, Julie. You are.
You're doing it.
So there is a lot of us when we have to dig deep. And there are situations that we have to dig deep. Again, it goes back to that whole resilience and grit
Mm.
factor. Do you have something that you either a physical object that you wear, that you carry? I'm looking at somebody that's been in the industry for a while. You're established. You have this incredible career and organization. And I don't know, do you ever have to dig deep? And if you do, is there some sort of physical object that you have that gives you, or even if a belief that gives you that superpower boost that
Yeah.
we with other people?
Well, it's not physical. It's funny to hear you even talk about those things because, as you know, if you were inside my head, that those are none of the words I would use to describe myself. So it's an effort every time to put yourself out there in a
Mm,
big way, particularly if you have any issues with self confidence or shyness or that. So it's a push for me. There's not a physical object, but there's definitely a grounding with family. So I mean, I can get a picture of my son's face in my head and figure
mm,
out this is why I'm doing it. The other time I think I have to often dig deep is with speaking, which is ironic because I do a lot of it. And I think the thing that flipped was again a thought, a mantra, if you will, which is I'm not here to tell people what to do. I'm just sharing what I've learned. It's a conversation. I'm just here to help. So there's certain things where it kind of allows you to let go of the pressure of who you're supposed to be and focus on what's important. And if they don't like it, nothing I can do. So those are a couple of the thoughts that come to mind for me regularly.
yeah, that's really, really great advice. I can't imagine you ever having like a sense of doubt or
You should
I
you should go to my
know
head
it happens to
sometimes.
me. I know you can feel that refreshing, that type of vulnerability in that conversation right now says
Yeah.
to me that, oh, you mean that's perfectly normal? You mean like I might feel like that even 10 years from now, 5 years from now,
Yeah.
that is the normal part of being, of just being a female in a great industry and trying to show up as a leader. So thank
Absolutely.
you for that, because that's an eye-opening piece of advice for all of our listeners today. And you have been a great guest.
Thank
And
you.
I've learned a lot about feedback from our discussion today. Where is the best place for people to reach you? Absolute Engagement. We didn't even talk about your book. Oh, we have to just spend a few minutes. Right? That when I think about a book, I'm like,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
boy, trepidation there. That's not for you, Tina. How hard was it? How
I
hard was it to write the book? When did the decision for that? Are you planning on writing another book?
yes is the answer to the last question. I'm thinking
Love
about
it.
what the next book will be. Um, Look, there's the whole content piece of books, and then there's the writing. And I know people struggle with different. Like I'm kind of, if you look, we all have certain skills. I feel like writing is not difficult for me.
That's obvious.
That's kind of where a natural thing is for me. But it took me many years to get to the point of knowing how I wanted to bring things together in a book. And so, you would argue that it was years in the making because all of the modeling, all of the, what I talked about on client experience and such was, I mean, that was years of figuring that out. The trigger, though, was very personal. It's what we were talking about before. And it was when I turned 50 and decided I needed to, it was like personal therapy, basically, is what it was. And so that became the connector, which was personal vision, which was what I was going through. And I thought I was going to pull it all together. Once I actually made that decision, it was probably 3 to 4 months of solid work, not full-time work, but solid work. But I was blogging. I was doing,
Yeah, you didn't miss a beat, and
it
I
wasn't fresh. I could, you can, one of the easiest ways to write books, I think, is to write a lot of blog posts, and then you just
Mhm.
pull them together almost into a book. So that's, I did that to some extent, not completely, but it made it a lot easier.
So I do want to say the book is The Pursuit of Absolute Engagement. It is available on Amazon, and one of the things you'll be happy to know, it is available on the Kindle version as well,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you can, right, when we go back to traveling. And so that's great. I have your first book, so I
Okay.
look forward to the second book, and maybe
And then me reading your book.
yeah, right. But I can identify when I turned 50, I actually started the consultancy. That was 3 years ago,
There you
right?
go.
Yeah. So to really have that, what are you going to do different in your life, and how are you going to show up and lead differently? And
Yeah.
so it's been wonderful to talk to you. Again, you're a female leader, you're a friend, and you're somebody very near and dear to me, but also to the women and the men who are listening to this podcast right now. So thank you very much for all your wisdom today. We look forward to the second book. And then people find you how again?
AbsoluteEngagement.com. The blog is there. You can link to anything that we share from there.
Okay, great. And Julie has a lot of great resources, and we'll be sharing some of the resources as well too today. So thank you very much for listening. Have a great, great day.
You're listening to In the Suite, a podcast that shares amazing stories of women in business in the financial services and the wealth management industry. This podcast is sponsored by C-Suite Social Media, a digital marketing and social media agency for C-Suite leaders in finance and technology. You can visit csuitesocialmedia.com to learn more and for copies of today's show notes from today's broadcast. And thank you so much for listening and subscribing and helping to support this podcast with your reviews. I would love it, and it would mean so much if you left us a 5-star review for this episode with the amazing Julie Littlechild. And always, if you would like to share the name of a successful woman in financial services we should interview, please send it to me at tina@csuitesocialmedia.com. We have received a lot of great names so far, and we are working behind the scenes to make it all possible. Just wait till you see what's in store soon. Again, thank you so much for listening and subscribing to In the Suite.